The main reason that we've all heard of the idea of false memories when it comes to CSA is because the concept was popularized by the False Memory Foundation in the 90s, and I'm going to read about that foundation and how not great they are. This is part 3 in a little series. My second video really got throttled, so if you want to see that, click on this comment and it'll take you back to it. Also keep in mind that this content can be very triggering if you are a CSA survivor, so if you don't have the capacity today, you can always hit the save button and come back and watch later. The FMS Foundation was founded largely by one set of parents, Pamela and Peter Freyd, who claim that accusations of sexual abuse made by their daughter Jennifer Freyd are false. As psychotherapist David Kaloff put it, there is persuasive evidence that this organization grew out of one family's feud that's overgrown its boundaries and has come into popular culture. 1 week after she entered therapy in 1990, Jennifer Freyd, professor of psychology at the University of Oregon, recovered memories of sexual abuse by her father, Peter Freyd. She confronted her parents about the incest, and they denied it. 6 months later, her mother, Pamela Freyd, published How Could This Happen? Coping with a False Accusation of Incest and Rape, under the pseudonym Jane Doe. The article contained personal information about Jennifer, some of which was inaccurate and much of which was embarrassing, and Pamela Freyd sent copies of the Jane Doe article along with letters clearly indicating that she was the author to her daughter's colleagues. Among the recipients were members of Jennifer Freyd's own department at the university, where she was being considered for a promotion to full professorship. The following winter, Pamela Freyd founded the FMS Foundation, and since then, she has crisscrossed the country promoting the idea of false memories and talking about the destruction of families through false allegations. In the meantime, Jennifer chose not to speak publicly about her childhood abuse or about her mother's role in founding the FMS Foundation, as she still hoped for a private resolution of these matters. Finally, in 1993, she broke her silence and told her side of the story, stating, "I have already lost so much of my privacy and in such an unclear and distorted way that I have come to desire clarity and public truth as the lesser of two undesirable situations." Jennifer Freyd reported that she was sexually abused by her father from the time that she was 3 or 4 years old until she was 16. Although the sexual abuse ended when she was a teenager, Jennifer detailed a continued pattern of sexualized talk, boundary violations, and invasive and demeaning treatment that continued into her adult years. She described her father using a replica of his part between his legs that he displayed in the living room. She recounted being humiliated in front of visitors by her father's excessively sexual comments, and when she tried to discuss a memory of sexual abuse with her parents, she related that her mother's reaction was that the memory had to be false because if it was true, their dog would have made a lot of noise. As she said, the dog always joined, apparently noisily, in human sexual events. Jennifer Freyd described a family in which denial, minimization, and distortion were commonplace. Throughout her growing up years, her father was an active alcoholic. He was eventually hospitalized for alcoholism in the early 1980s. She related that during her childhood, her father, quote, sometimes discussed his own experiences of being sexually abused as an 11-year-old boy. He discussed these experiences, however, not in terms of abuse, but in terms of precocious sexuality, calling himself a kept boy. The Freyds have made every effort to discredit Jennifer's testimony, and as she explains, attempts to discredit her are not totally new. She says, "My father told various people that I was brain damaged at various times throughout my childhood and adult years. I was reminded of this theory of brain damage by a family friend who had heard it from my father while I was a graduate student at Stanford University on a National Science Foundation graduate fellowship. It is hard for Jennifer Freyd to understand why her father would say such things or why he would be believed." She says, "I am flabbergasted that my memory is considered false and my alcoholic's father's memory is considered rational and sane. Is my father more credible than me because I have a history of lying or not having a firm grasp on reality? No, I am a scientist whose empirical work has been replicated in laboratories around this country and Europe. And until the last few years of parental invasion, I enjoyed an excellent professional reputation without any scandal attached to my name. Am I not believed because I am a woman, a, quote, female in her 30s, as some of the newspaper articles seem to emphasize? Am I therefore a hopeless hysteric by definition? Indeed, why is my parents' denial at all credible? In the end, it is precisely because I was abused that I am able to be discredited, despite my personal and professional success. Most incomprehensible to Jennifer is Peter and Pamela Freyd's invitation to her to join the advisory board of the foundation, an organization whose very existence is predicated on discounting her reality. In a letter expressing surprise that she had declined, Peter Freyd revealed, "I still insist on thinking of our newsletter, indeed the whole project, as being primarily a way of communicating with our daughters. The idea that the FMS Foundation is seen by its founders as a way to communicate with their daughters is alarming," as Jennifer states. "The weight of the whole foundation stands behind my mother's frenzied denial of my reality. For my parents' sake, I hope they can find a way to look inward to do their own healing instead of waging a kind of war at the national level." The FMS Foundation is only the latest incarnation of the backlash against victims and survivors of child sexual abuse. Although the foundation grew directly out of the pain and dysfunction of one family, it did not arise in a vacuum. The backlash had been gaining momentum for some time. In 1984, Victims of Child Abuse Laws, or VOCAL, was established in Minneapolis to champion the rights of the accused in child abuse cases, claiming that children's allegations of sexual abuse are frequently false and that children do not make credible witnesses. VOCAL was born in the aftermath of a highly publicized child sexual abuse trial in Jordan, Minnesota. In that case, accusations of the sadistic ritual abuse of dozens of children led to 1 conviction, 2 acquittals, and charges being dropped for 21 other defendants. Because this was the first trial involving such massive and unprecedented allegations, the investigation was flawed and questions remain, but it's clear that children had been abused. In his book, The Battle and the Backlash, David Heckler dates the origin of the backlash to the Jordan case, and specifically to September 19, 1984, the day Lois and Robert Bentz were acquitted of abusing their son and 4 other children. 1 month later, VOCAL had its first organization meeting in Minneapolis. Robert and Lois Bentz and another Jordan defendant were on VOCAL's first board of directors. Psychologist Ralph Underwager, expert witness in the Bentz trial, participated in VOCAL's initial meetings, acted as the group's first spokesman, and spoke at VOCAL's first 4 national conferences. Underwager and his wife, psychologist Helida Wakefield, went on to publish Issues in Child Abuse Accusations, a journal that primarily prints articles supporting the idea that most sexual abuse allegations are false. Underwager was also pivotal in the formation of the FMS Foundation. Its original membership was drawn from a list of 202 families who had contacted him through his Institute for Psychological Therapies, and he served as an advisory board member for the foundation until the summer of 1993. VOCAL and the FMS Foundation take much the same stance. VOCAL claims that children aren't credible witnesses and that they are too young and prone to fantasy. The FMS Foundation says adult survivors shouldn't be believed because they've been misled by manipulative therapists. VOCAL accuses investigators of asking leading questions to get children to admit to abuse that never really happened. The FMS Foundation says therapists brainwash adult clients. VOCAL accuses child protective workers, or child savers, as they call them, of incompetence, and says that they're responsible for breaking up families. The FMS Foundation clearly accuses therapists and self-help books of doing the same. Both groups talk about witch hunts and child abuse hysteria, and claim it is impossible for defendants to get a fair trial in sex abuse cases because there's a presumption of guilt rather than innocence. Both groups say that they are concerned about the guilty going free as they are the innocent being falsely accused, but publish only articles dealing with false accusations. And neither group has a way to tell which of the members are falsely accused and which are guilty. Both VOCAL and the FMS Foundation make some legitimate claims. False accusations have occurred. Some investigators have asked leading questions, and therapists have, on occasion, misconstrued a client's history, but the extent of these problems has been greatly exaggerated by both groups. Both groups then go on to draw distorted conclusions that they use to manipulate public opinion. Although the particular organizations like VOCAL and the FMS Foundation may rise and fall, the backlash is likely to continue to evolve and to find supporters in other incarnations. Until we as a culture face the reality of sexual abuse, our collective denial will continue to feed and need such groups. Both VOCAL and the FMS Foundation have ties to people whose views on child sexual abuse are alarming. Leroy Schultz, a featured speaker at VOCAL's 2 national conferences and an editor for Ralph Underwager's Issues in Child Abuse Accusations, has written about the possibility of consensual sex between adults and children. Of child victims, Schultz writes, their cooperation is usually needed to at least initiate the sex act, if not complete of it. He goes on to say that police and other reports, quote, do not adequately explain the portion of guilt that may be attributable to the victim, end quote. And finally, Schultz states, quote, so great can the role of the victim be in sex offenses that many should be considered offenders themselves, unquote. Richard Gardner, a professor of child psychiatry at Columbia University and frequent expert witness for the defense in child abuse cases, has appeared numerous times on television promoting the idea of false memory syndrome. In an article published by Underwager's Issues in Child Abuse Accusations, he writes, sexual activities between adults and children are a universal phenomenon. Such encounters are not necessarily traumatic. The determinant as to whether the experience will be traumatic is the social attitude towards these encounters. As Hamlet said, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Of relevance here is the belief by many of these therapists that a sexual encounter between an adult and a child, no matter how short, no matter how tender, loving, and non-painful, automatically and predictably must be psychologically traumatic to the child. This belief justifies lengthy, ongoing therapy. Obviously, if the therapist did not take this position, then she would not be able to enjoy the financial rewards attendant to this belief. Ralph Underwager and his wife were interviewed in Pedica, the journal of PDF-IA, published in the Netherlands. In response to the question, is choosing PDF-IA for you a responsible choice for the individual? Underwager replied, certainly it is responsible. What I have been struck by as I have come to know more about and understand people who choose PDF-IA is that they let themselves be too much defined by other people. That is usually essentially negative definition. PDFs spend a lot of time and energy defending their choice. I don't think that a PDF needs to do that. PDFs can boldly and courageously affirm what they choose. They can say what they want is to find the best way to love. I am also a theologian, and as a theologian, I believe it is God's will that there be closeness and intimacy, unity of the flesh between people. A PDF person can say, this closeness is possible for me within the choices that I've made. What I think is that PDFs can make the assertion that a pursuit of intimacy and love is what they choose. With boldness, they can say, I believe this is in fact part of God's will. When this interview came to the attention of survivors, their supporters, and subsequently the media in the summer of 1993, Underwager resigned from the FMS Foundation Advisory Board. However, his wife still serves on the advisory board. Over the past decade, the primary motivation for the backlash is the establishment of a legal defense for those accused of CSA. Over the past decade, survivors have begun to lobby the legislatures in all 50 states to make it possible for adult survivors to bring civil suits against their perpetrators for abuse that they suffered in childhood. It was only when these legislative and judicial reforms began to take place that we started to hear about false memory syndrome. Just a reminder, this is talking about the 90s. This is an old book. Judith Herman believes these suits and the political activism that enabled them to occur are the motivating force behind the current memory controversy. This is a quote of Judith Herman. I believe that the intense popular and professional interest in this question is not fueled by a sudden fascination with academic memory research. Rather, the debate is being driven by forensic questions. We are witnessing a struggle over issues of accountability. Up until very recently, sexual assaults in general and sexual abuse of children in particular have been essentially perfect crimes. Victims have been effectively denied access to the justice system, and perpetrators have been practically assured of impunity. As a result of feminist consciousness raising and legal reforms, recently, some victims have begun to hold perpetrators accountable for their crimes. This is a very real threat to the power and privilege of perpetrators. It is natural to expect that they will fight back. The struggle over the credibility of abuse victims is not new. In fact, the history of backlash corresponds directly to the evolution of defense arguments in child sex abuse cases. Patricia Toth, executive director of the National Center for the Prosecution of Child Abuse, says, 20 years ago, there weren't a large number of cases of abuse, either physical or sexual, being criminally prosecuted. It happens every now and then, but they were few and far between. If a family member was involved, it was left up to the civil system to remove the child from the home. Parents weren't convicted of crimes, but they might lose custody of their children. Toth says the emergence of rape crisis centers and the increased attention given to adult rape cases led more to focus on child sexual abuse. Children started showing up as victims. 10 to 15 years ago, you began to see the first specialized child abuse units in police departments and prosecutors' offices. Victim witness programs became more plentiful and started to devote more attention to children as victims. All of this converged. We started taking child abuse cases more seriously, and as we began to file more cases and get more convictions, the people who found themselves in the position of being accused, some of whom had the means, got more serious about fighting back. Initial defense in CSA cases were rather unsophisticated. The first defenses were things like, I'm a good person, I couldn't have done it. Now that there's more recognition that abusers don't have to look like monsters, the defense has moved towards other arguments. As more cases were filed that involved suspected abuse of groups of children, the defenses evolved. When a group of children all described similar activities by the same suspect, they could no longer say, this kid just has something against this suspect. That's why she's making it up. So they resorted to, these ideas were planted in the kids' heads. The suggestibility of children defense has really grown with this backlash. Lori Braga, who co-directs the National Foundation for Children with her husband Joseph Braga, explains how the development of false memory rhetoric and the FMS Foundation is a logical extension of this battle over the viability of children's testimony in sexual abuse cases. Those of us who were working to establish the credibility of abused kids in court were glad when adult survivors became coming forward in large numbers. We felt that their stories would give credibility to kids as witnesses. The backlash feared the same. So it was a natural progression for them to attack not only kids as witnesses, but adults too. One person wrongly convicted is a tragedy, but 100 perpetrators allowed to continue to abuse what could be thousands of children is not less of a tragedy. The violation of children must be considered to be at least as serious as the violation of the rights of adults, because children are more vulnerable than adults. They need and deserve the fullest possible protection. There will be another part.